At dawn on September 1st, 1939, the sky over Central Europe gave no warning. The sun rose over fields of late summer rye and rows of brick houses. Church bells were ready to ring. Trains stood waiting on quiet tracks. Children slept beside open windows, unaware that events already set in motion would soon redraw their world. Beyond the horizon, engines were starting. In the Baltic port of Danzig, a German battleship rested in the harbour. Sailors moved across its decks in the half-light, checking equipment, speaking in low voices, listening to the wind off the sea. At 4:45 a.m., its guns would open fire. In that moment, an uneasy peace would give way to something far more destructive. How does a continent move from tension to open war? How does an ordinary morning become a turning point in history? For Poland, for Germany, for the free city of Danzig, today's Gdansk, and soon for the wider world. The 35 days between September 1st and October 6th would alter borders and lives with lasting consequences. They would mark the beginning of the Second World War and the end of an already fragile European order. In the months before the invasion, there had been a sense of strain beneath the surface. Poland in the late 1930s was still a young state. After more than a century partitioned by neighbouring empires, it had re-emerged as an independent nation in 1918. Its cities carried the energy of renewal. Warsaw's cafes and universities were busy with debate. In Krakow, students and professors filled lecture halls steeped in history. In rural villages, families worked land that only a generation earlier had been governed by foreign powers. The country faced real challenges. Its politics were unsettled. Its economy was uneven. Yet independence was deeply felt. Polish was spoken freely in schools. National holidays were celebrated with pride. The memory of occupation remained. But so did a determination to safeguard sovereignty. To the west, Germany was undergoing its own transformation. The instability of the Weimar Republic had given way to a regime built on nationalism and control, led by Adolf Hitler. By 1939, Nazi Germany had rearmed, remilitarized the Rhineland, annexed Austria, and dismantled Czechoslovakia. Each step had been met with diplomatic protests, but little direct resistance from the major Western powers. Efforts to avoid another large-scale war had bought time, but they had not resolved the underlying ambitions driving Berlin's policies. In the north, the free city of Danzig occupied a delicate position. Though largely German-speaking, it was under international supervision and served as Poland's access to the Baltic Sea. The so-called Polish corridor connected the country to the coast, separating East Prussia from the rest of Germany. To many in Berlin, this arrangement symbolized the grievances left by the Treaty of Versailles. Publicly, diplomacy continued through the summer of 1939. Speeches were delivered. Negotiations were attempted. But behind closed doors, military plans advanced. German commanders refined a strategy designed to avoid the drawn-out stalemate of the First World War. The concept, later known as Blitzkrieg, lightning war, relied on speed, coordination, and surprise. Armored divisions would drive rapidly through enemy lines. Aircraft would disrupt communications and supply routes. Infantry would follow, encircling forces before they could reorganize. It was warfare built on momentum. Poland understood the danger but faced serious constraints. Its army was sizable but not uniformly equipped. Cavalry units remained part of its structure, serving as mobile infantry rather than symbols of outdated tactics. The Polish Air Force, though skilled, operated fewer and older aircraft than Germany's Luftwaffe. Geographically, the country was exposed, with long borders to defend and limited natural barriers. In August 1939, the strategic picture shifted dramatically. On August 23rd, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression agreement known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, negotiated between Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Publicly, it pledged neutrality between the two powers. Privately, it contained a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Poland was once again positioned between rival empires. The wider world did not immediately grasp the full implications. For Poland, the consequences would soon become clear. On the night of August 31st, German operatives staged a false incident at a radio station near the border, presenting it as a Polish attack. It provided the justification Berlin needed. At 4:45 a.m. on September 1st, the battleship SMS Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Polish garrison at Westerplatte. Within minutes, German forces advanced across multiple points along the border. Tanks moved swiftly over open ground. Aircraft struck rail lines, bridges, and communication centers. The sound of dive bombers echoed across towns and farmland. The strategy was not only military, it was psychological. Speed and shock were intended to overwhelm resistance before it could fully organize. Civilians quickly found themselves caught in the upheaval. Roads filled with families heading east, carrying what they could. In the town of Wielun, air attacks struck early in the morning, causing heavy civilian casualties. It was among the first examples of the new war reaching beyond strictly defined military targets. Despite the scale of the assault, Polish forces resisted. At Westerplatte, the small garrison held its position for 7 days under constant attack, far longer than expected. In Upper Silesia and elsewhere, Polish units mounted counterattacks and delaying actions. Cavalry brigades targeted vulnerable infantry and supply lines, using mobility to offset technological disadvantages. The Polish Air Force dispersed aircraft to secondary airfields, preserving part of its strength and engaging in determined aerial battles. Yet the imbalance in resources and coordination was difficult to overcome. German armored divisions bypassed defensive positions and cut deep into the country, isolating units from one another. Continuous airstrikes disrupted communication. Commanders often fought without clear knowledge of developments beyond their immediate front. In Warsaw, air raid sirens became part of daily life. Residents sought shelter in basements as bombs struck infrastructure and residential areas. Essential services faltered. Hospitals worked under immense strain. The capital prepared itself for a prolonged defense. In one apartment building near the Vistula River, a schoolteacher named Zofia gathered her students in the cellar during air raids. The children had heard that Britain and France had pledged support. They asked whether help was coming. She offered reassurance where she could, though events were unfolding faster than anyone could fully comprehend. On September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany. For Poland, the announcement brought a measure of hope. But on the Western Front, large-scale military action did not immediately follow. The early phase of the conflict in the West remained limited, later described as the phony war. For Polish forces facing sustained attack, declarations alone could not shift the balance. By mid-September, German troops were nearing Warsaw. The city endured artillery bombardment and airstrikes. Supplies dwindled. Yet resistance continued. Civilians assisted soldiers, reinforcing barricades and caring for the wounded. The defense became both a military and civic effort. Then, on September 17th, the situation changed decisively. From the east, Soviet forces crossed into Polish territory, acting in accordance with the secret terms of the August Pact. Polish units, already retreating under pressure from the west, now confronted a second advancing army. The prospect of coordinated defense effectively disappeared. Some commanders sought to withdraw toward Romania or Hungary, hoping to continue the struggle from abroad. Others engaged Soviet units in limited fighting, uncertain of orders and aware of the larger strategic reality. For many soldiers and civilians, the second invasion confirmed that Poland's isolation was complete. In eastern towns and villages, residents encountered new authorities and unfamiliar uniforms. The shift brought uncertainty. Some hoped it might offer relief from the fighting in the west. Others feared a different form of occupation. In forests near Iwao, a young officer named Jan buried his regiment standard before surrendering to Soviet troops, believing the war would not last forever. He could not know how events would unfold for thousands of captured officers in the months to come. By late September, organized resistance had been reduced to scattered pockets. The Battle of the Bzura River became the largest Polish counteroffensive of the campaign. For several days, Polish forces regained ground and demonstrated that German advances could be challenged. But sustained air attacks and encirclement eventually forced a withdrawal. On September 27th, after weeks of siege, Warsaw surrendered. The city had suffered extensive damage. Bridges were down. Historic districts were scarred. The cost to the civilian population was severe. Along the Baltic coast, forces on the Hel Peninsula continued their defense into early October. The final organized Polish units laid down their arms after the Battle of Kock on October 6th. In just over a month, the Polish state had been overrun by two powers, Germany and the Soviet Union, divided the territory along the lines set out in their secret agreement. Once again, Poland disappeared from the map as an independent country. For Germany, the campaign was presented as validation of its military doctrine. The rapid coordination of armor and air power had produced a decisive result. Observers around the world studied the methods employed. For the Soviet Union, the occupation extended its western frontier. Yet the arrangement with Germany was temporary, built on strategic calculation rather than lasting trust. For Poland, the consequences were profound. In areas under German control, policies aimed at reshaping society began quickly. Members of the intelligentsia, clergy, and community leaders were targeted for arrest. Jewish communities were forced into segregated districts that would later become central to far more devastating developments. In the east, Soviet authorities carried out arrests and deportations of officials, landowners, and others considered politically unreliable. Families were sent far from their homes. Institutions were reorganized under new systems. The invasion had not only altered borders, it had disrupted the social fabric of an entire nation. Yet resistance did not end. Polish service members who escaped abroad regrouped in France and later in Britain. They would take part in campaigns across Europe and beyond. Inside occupied Poland, an underground network developed, maintaining education, communication, and armed resistance. Despite the risks, clandestine publications circulated and secret classes continued. The wider consequences of the invasion were immediate. Britain and France were now at war with Germany. Within months, fighting would spread to Scandinavia, the Low Countries, and France itself. The conflict that began in Poland expanded across continents. The territories seized in 1939 would again become battlefields when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. The region would endure repeated upheaval. The campaign also demonstrated the changing character of warfare. The combination of speed, coordination, and air power would shape military thinking for years to come. Civilians, increasingly exposed to modern conflict, became central to the experience of war. International institutions proved unable to prevent aggression. Commitments without enforcement revealed their limits. In the aftermath, political leaders and thinkers would reflect on how Europe had reached this point, and what might have altered its course. The legacy of those 35 days extended far beyond 1939. The invasion of Poland marked the opening phase of a global conflict that would claim tens of millions of lives. It set in motion policies and practices that would have devastating consequences across Europe. After 1945, Poland's borders shifted westward, and its political system aligned with the Soviet sphere for decades. The memory of invasion and occupation became central to national identity. Across Europe, the experience of the war influenced efforts to build new forms of cooperation and collective security in the decades that followed. In Gdansk, fragments of Westerplatte remain. In Warsaw, a rebuilt city stands where destruction once seemed overwhelming. In forests near Smolensk, memorials mark sites of wartime loss. The events of 1939 are not distant abstractions. They are preserved in landscapes and memory. What unfolded between September 1 and October 6 was more than a short military campaign. It was a turning point that revealed how modern states, armed with ideology and technology, could reshape the world in a matter of weeks. It began on a morning that seemed ordinary. It ended with a nation divided and a continent drawn into war. Looking back, it can be tempting to view the outcome as inevitable. Yet history is shaped by decisions, by actions taken and not taken. The events of September 1939 were the result of choices made in capitals and carried out on fields and streets. The fields of Poland would eventually grow quiet again. Cities would be rebuilt. New generations would attend school and rebuild communities. But the memory of those engines at dawn would endure. And with it, a reminder of how quickly stability can give way to conflict, and how fragile peace can be when warning signs go unanswered.